Hello, everyone, and welcome to This Week in Hospitality Marketing, show number 422. I am your host, Loren Gray, and happy budget season. I know we often joke about it. I do. That we are one of the only industries that actually have a season about our budgets. We are knee deep in it right now, middle way, as I would say, or close to it. Kind of like hurricane season in a strange, almost similar way. Season starts for all of us in the industry come August, where we're rallying the data, and we've had that conversation here on the show. We're now into season of month 2 of the season out of the 3 months that are usually involved. September, which is the calculation phase and the function phase of what we're going to craft as our brilliant plan and strategy for our budget of 2024, which brings us to a core element of our continuing conversation. Now, if you missed last week's show, 421, we talked about how to stress test your budgets, in the sense that as you work through the process of revenue source, because you're still kind of towards the top end, your top line revenue calculations and so forth. So you're looking at your sources of business still. That's your first progression in. You've been given the banner, you've been given the goal, you've been given the target. And now it's about taking that number and understanding how that's going to happen. Where is these sources of business coming from? And we talked last week a lot about how to take your channels of contribution, define what those channels of contribution are, and then from that, determine where your sources of revenue opportunity are in each of those channels by the conversion values, total volume, so forth, or top line contributing values. And then stress test it as if you were to shrink those or remove those or manipulate the contribution percentages. How does that hold up to your ability to still hit your targeted revenue goals? If you missed that show, it's a great show, not just because I talked about it, which sounds really egotistical. It's just, it was really good content. If it reminds you as to the processes, dusting off the annual way rites of passage with budgets, or it's your first year of doing budgets. But it brings us to today's show. And today's show is a kind of a continuation of conversation related to it, about something that you need to have in preparation to your process of budgeting. It doesn't so much bode towards the creation of budgets directly, but it does contribute to the idea of how to convince and sell your budgeting as to what you want to do versus what you're allowed to do financially. How much money are they actually going to allocate towards your efforts, and calculating that functionality. And one of the key conversation points is about the forecasting of revenue. Like we said, what are your channels going to contribute? How much is going to be contributed in the way that you have mathematically planned? And when I say mathematically planned, I mean things like, here's my X volume on my website. The number of people that come to my website get translated to how many people purchase through my website. Now, obviously, you drive traffic to your website in a variety of ways. So there's paid ad campaigns, paid social campaigns, Meta goes actually booking users, so let's skip that one. Your CRM information might drive to your website with a content page, might go directly to your book engine. That's always variable. But the idea that your website has this volume of traffic, and that volume of traffic translates by conversion to a volume of revenue. Well, that conversion volume ratio is something you can calculate. If I'm having 100,000 people a month visit my website, what happens if I get 110,000 people visiting my website? Does my conversion, if I can factor my conversion factor remaining, how much more business does that give me? See, channel contribution. So that's a long entrance to our topic this week, is how to calculate projected revenue gains in hospitality marketing. Forecasting is one thing. And you may say, what is the difference between revenue gains, projected revenue gains, and forecasting? I will tell you the way I define it. There are variations. We're going to discuss a few of how to do this and how to define them. But pretty much forecasting is what your attainment goal is measured at. This is the number I think is going to happen based on the following data. I have a confidence factor of X that this is what we're going to produce based on these numbers: volume, conversions, cost, all that stuff. Projected revenue gains is actually the part that you would get if it was different. For instance, I spend $10,000 a month in paid ads for Google. That $10,000 gets me a 10-to-1 return. So I make $100,000 off of the direct spend of $10,000 for paid ad campaigns on Google. I get $100,000 for that. That's my forecast. I'm planning on spending $10,000 because I plan on making $100,000 from that spend, because that's my ratio that I feel I'll be getting from that based on this historical data. That's my forecast. What about projected revenue gains? What happens if I spent 12,000? Would I incrementally maintain just okay, if I spent 12, I'd still make my conversion value on that. So 10 to 1 would mean that I would be making $120,000. Does it match? Well, now all of a sudden other factors come into play. Diminished value of return. We've had this conversation where we talk about percentage voice when marketing. And this is the example of why I'm saying that it's just not as easy as saying if I spend more, I get more. You can spend more, but you may not get as much in relationship. Your return on it is lesser. Your diminished value is lesser. When it came to percentage voice, and we talked about this with our meta search discussion back in, I think, 417, show 417. And that was, if I'm getting 60% of the voice, meaning out of the 100% of people looking for my product in my market, I get 60% eyeballs on my product. That's my voice. That's percentage of voice. Think of it as your market share for your STAR report. So I'm getting 60% of the people seeing my product. 40% of the time, they don't see my product. So I want to get 70% voice. I want to spend the amount of money necessary to get 10% more of the people that's not seeing my option of product in market that they're looking for them to see it. But here's the problem. It's like a tractor pull. If anybody's ever familiar with it, being from Florida, we do tractor pulls. I'm sure there's other places that do that. Anyways, comes out of the gate really fast. We're good. It's easy for the 10, 20, 30, 40, 50% of voice. We're not having to spend too much money. We're just basically chewing up the land. We're getting there. It's the money return is right there. The more we spend, the more voice we're getting. That's great. Until the sled slides back a little farther, and all of a sudden it takes a way more effort to get that extra 10 foot, 5 foot, 2 foot, 1 foot. Now we're stuck in the mud. The idea is that just because you spend more money, it's not worth it to spend that much more money for what you get back for what you spend. Diminished value of return. Now, I've gone through varieties of math ways of doing this, and I came up with, I thought was a brilliant 6 variable chart of diminished value of return of market spend when it came to budget forecasting. Literally for the reason we're talking about today, that if I have all these combinations of my spends, then these variables, 6 of them, would show where my threshold of where the next dollar spent would not be worth it. My diminished value threshold. What would be where I wouldn't want to spend more money because it's just not worth it. That dollar I spent, I made only a penny off of, or only 10%. I actually based it on net revenue. But anyways, that's a tangent. And was it worth it to spend? So going back to our analogy of percentage of voice, that extra 10% might cost me half of what it spent me to get to 60%. It was just so much more money to get pushed that much harder because it's harder to get in front of those people. You have to be more competitive with your bids. You have to spend more money on your bids. And all of that volume increase can be geometric. That it's not just a dollar for increase of a 10 to 1 ratio. It's a dollar increase for maybe only a $3 ratio. And at that point, you're already at a 33% cost. And you put that on your flow through, all of a sudden you're negative 20%. It's costing you 20 cents for that increase in volume because you're not making any profit. As a matter of fact, you're in the reverse. You're actually digging into your cost factor for producing it. So say, for instance, you have your cost ratio for your hotel that through all of your flow through of costs, your EBITDAs, earning before tax income, and so forth, you fixed everything else like this, you're hoping to net a 10% profit, which is artificially high, but we'll take it as a round number. And to get that 10% profit, that means 90 cents out of every dollar that you spent went towards a cost, so that 10 cents of that actually goes in your pocket. So if your marketing costs go from 20% to 30%, you literally took that money out of your pocket just to make that dollar. You may have covered your costs-ish, okay? But that's all you did. It's not worth it. Unless you feel there's a brand value, and there's a whole strategy to this, that, by awareness, you develop other levels of business in future tense, direct value contribution, lifetime value, which we'll talk about a little bit more today as well. The calculation of lifetime value is one of the factors associated with projected revenue gains. So going back to our topic, how to calculate projected revenue gains in hospitality marketing. It is not forecasting, because forecasting is the mark that you're trying to hit based on the strategies that you're implementing. projecting revenue gains, determining where avenues of revenue might exist are models. It's called modeling. You are creating scenarios to see if there's other avenues of opportunity. It's a little bit like going to a tidal pool and picking up a teaspoon of water at a time when there's a whole ocean just past that tidal pool that you could be tapping into and getting a bucket of water from. Getting what you get for what you spend is a self-fulfilling circle. If you do it right, from the data that you've had historically, then you recreate the scenario that created the data that you're basing it on again. So it self-fulfills. I spent this last time and I got this much. I spend it again, I get the same amount. I'm brilliant. I'm doing the right thing. But again, going to that analogy of a tide pool versus the ocean, you're only getting small portion because that's all that you're limiting your circle to. You're doing this much and you're getting this much. You're doing this much, you're getting this much. So you have to try other variations that say, would this work differently if I did this? If I changed this, what would I do this? Now, in comparison to our last week's show where we talked about stress testing your budget, these are conditionals about attrition and loss. We flipped the coin now, and this week we're talking about opportunities and unrealized gains. Like, rather than limiting ourselves that we told ourselves we're only going to spend $1,000 a month on paid social, and we get what we get from paid social, and it's a mathematical number we're happy with. We get 5 to 1, 4 to 1 based on relative value or contributing value or attribution value or whatever. It's a comfortable relationship that everybody in the decision tree has agreed to. Okay. Here we say, wonder if we decided to just blow this bad boy out. How much more money could we spend before it wasn't worth spending? The diminished value return line. And calculate that out to see that maybe, in fact, we're spending a third of what we should be spending, because if we even spent $2,000 more, we'd still make the same relative value relationship that we were basing on our $1,000 a month spent. See what I mean? Like I told you about with MetaSearch, where it was easy to get the 20, 30, 40, 50% voice because we were spending the same amount of money and still able to spend more money, get more of the voice. But when we get to a certain level, usually diminished value of return, going farther cost us way more than it was worth. Same methodology when it comes to projected revenue gains, trying to determine how far out that line goes. And that usually meant trial and error. Historically, the only way we could know what opportunity existed is we had to test. We had to keep a portion of our budget to the side that was meant to test, to sample test whether or not that was a trajectory that we should consider. Fortunately, in our wonderful technology-based world, we have lots of really cool tools now that can do this with using real data and projecting forward the idea of what it would be if we did something different. Now, on the podcast, we've really beaten this tool up a lot because I use it persistently, and that is called Geru, Geru. And I'm not here on the live show to push a tool. I make nothing from doing this. It's an example of a tool that I love to use. Same reason why I talk about on the podcast. It's a tool that helps me understand and visualize how this all works. I got this because I'm very much about a mind mapping, where you draw little bubbles and lines that go to other little bubbles and go to other lines, and you do conditions like a workflow. Did they open it or not open it? Yes, no. Take the yes side. If they did this, and you create all the branches of decision modeling that you do. That's a mind map. I do it in VR, which is really weird. I've never had anybody come and see my VRs. They probably look at it and go, "You need help." Anyway, so mind mapping is a stepping stone to what Geru does, which is calculating scenarios based on what you would like to project as ways of determining the success of variations to what you're doing, or even trying things you haven't done as to the potential success related to it. The key way of doing this is first deciding what data do you need to support the hypothesis that you're going to try to model. Modeling is just that. You're literally creating an artificial environment of looking at what things do in relationship, both cost and revenue opportunity, and consequence and reward. That's what you're doing, is you're putting this data together. What kind of data do you need? Well, as an easy example, if you're talking about your website, what is your general traffic? How many people are you actually talking about that come to your website? I have a great website, but if you're only getting 10 people a day, you really have some very poor metrics to base on what you could do with it. Everybody has to start somewhere, but it's a slow number. You have a longer ramp to ride. You need a little bit more runway to take off. If you're getting good volume, then it gives you good data to begin to figure, what could I do with this data? That's a hard number. I get 10,000 people a month. I get 100,000 people a month to my website. You have traffic. You cut away the people that bounce. Okay. I have a 30% bounce rate. I have 100,000 visitors. I got 70,000 people that go do something on my site. Maybe they only land there and look at stuff before they bounce, and they're not bouncing, but at least I have 70,000 people. Now you have a number to work with. Well, what do they do? Well, parts of what we know they do is from our analytics. What do they engage with? What do they react to? What is their pathway through our website? How much of many of those people go to a booking engine and don't book? How many people go to the booking engine and do book? We have these numbers. These are all data sources that we can have. So then if you want to create some modeling about what can we do to improve this channel if we did something different, aka projected revenue gain opportunities, is we know what we're currently doing. We know how much we're spending in paid ads on these channels for these campaigns, this social, these campaigns, this driving of revenue of traffic, on and on and on. Now we start changing it up. Wonder if we changed our modeling, not like we did with the stress testing if we took it away, but rather what happens if we turned it up? Would the conversion still exist? Would it not exist? Now, some of that we don't know because we don't know the reaction of actually doing it. That's where the cool technology comes in, because we can say, wonder if it goes down a percentage in conversion or up in a percentage. We can make a math number. Okay, so we have scenario one where it goes down in revenue for the increase in traffic, but this one goes up over here, or these variations, multivariance. You create this model to determine this is a good path of discovery. And then from it, you determine, is it worth it? Now, this is all before you spend more money. If you tweak this down, turn this up, add this, move this, and you're mathematically allowing those numbers to impact the results of what those things do, conversions and dollars and ADRs and length of stays and things as they modify. A tool like Guru would actually keep track of all that in your workflow that you're creating and tell you whether it's going up or down in the revenue potential that you're making these modifications for. A lot of that has to do with projecting what the revenue gain potential would be. Again, we're not stress testing it like we talked about last week, where we're reducing and modifying in a negative impact to know what the capabilities of the budget could do to maintain the integrity of what it's having to account for payment-wise. This is the inversion of that. This is what happens if we can modify and expand. Make it as a real example. Let's go back to the meta search discussion. You're spending $3,000 a month on meta search, and you're getting a great ratio, 10 to 1 return, 15 to 1 return, 10 to 1 return. Let's just do 10 to 1 return. So you're getting $30,000 for your $3,000 spend. Everybody's happy with that. Everything's positive. It's a great decision. But you want to see whether or not you're not spending fair share. Now, from a meta search strategy point of view, I can tell you that if you're getting more than 10 to 1 return on an ROI and everybody thinks they're King Kong and beats their chest, you're losing money of what you could do. That means you have more room to grow. Say, for instance, and I saw this as an example, which just drove me knucking futs, was I had one client telling me that their agency they're using with MetaSearch had like 150 to 1 return, 150 to 1 return. And they just thought they walked on water and handed out fish and bread. It's a terrible failure. Now, I say that with the caveat that if they were already sold out, then kudos to them that they could yield that through the channel. Problem was they weren't sold out. They're only about 65% occupancy. So they had 35% more of their inventory to sell. And the agency over there is beating his chest going, how cool are we that we're getting 151 to return. Every dollar you gave us, we give $150 back. What that really says is that you could have spent 5 times more money, made a much larger, fatter, happy contribution to the top line, maybe dug a nice dig into that 35% you hadn't sold yet inventory, okay, and been as completely successful with the campaign as you thought you were already for the 1 to 150 return ratio. Like I gave you the example, you started the meta search and it was easy to get 20, 30, 40, 50% of your voice, but to pay more, to get more, cost you a lot more than it was worth. They had plenty of runway to spend more money and make the same ratio of return of the dollars they were gathering for the dollars that they were spending. They could have brought it down to a 10 to 1 ratio and 5 times over the top line revenue that they could have produced by just spending more money. So that's an easy indicator in that strategy sense that if you're seeing those kind of things, there's lots of runway on those. You can do more. But what if you don't have such a clear picture? What if you don't have a clear picture as to how much more you should spend. So what you do is base it on cause and effect. You have the multivariate testing of what all your calculations of what you think you could do, should do, how you do it, whether you day parted, whether you device limited, whether you do a date of arrival, length of stay offers, dates of demand. There's lots of strategies of what variations you would create in this model for calculating potential revenue gains. And you look at those mathematically on a platform like Gira or other workflow uh, type tools like them. There are others. Um, and you see what ones seem to be the highest probability of opportunity for you, where it's now a comparison of models, which is when you force rank them, which is the most highly productive option out of the 5 we've made, or however many you made. What's the one that seems most likely to be a more positive combination of variations that we came up with? And you take that model and you figure out that we should be seeing these indicators from what we planned on doing. So if we implement the model, and this goes to your test budgeting that you do, okay, always looking at things that you don't normally do, you have a test budget. You go and see, does it react the way that we thought it would react? Kind of like, check to see if the air is good outside kind of thing. It's like, okay, let's try this. If the canary doesn't die, then the air is good enough at least to breathe. That's stage 1. Now we'll figure out the rest. That's what you're doing with projected revenue gains modeling. Is we figured out the best combination based on our variations that thinks we have the most optimum success opportunity. Now it's out to test the model. Now we go out and see, is it going to do what we think it does do good English at the time rate that we expect it to happen? Usually that happens over the course of, do we expect it to be in 48 hours, 72 hours? Usually 72 hours. Campaign influences usually happen in 3-day cycles, depending upon when you launch them. And you see, does it react the way you planned it to react? From that, you determine whether it warrants additional funding. Okay, it did what we thought it was going to do for the sampling we did, but that's a sample. Will it keep its integrity to the model if we begin to fund it progressively larger and larger, keeping in mind that we have to have threshold KPIs? If it doesn't perform at this level, it dies, because you're going to do launch of 2-3 of these at the same time. So they all have, just like ad campaigns, you're looking to see which one's the better one out of the ones it's being compared to. So if it hits the goals that you wanted to hit in the timeframes that you expected to hit them in, then you've literally created a new avenue of opportunity that you didn't have had you not done this kind of project. Had you not done this kind of process, you would not have thought of this as being a viable alternative to what you're currently doing. So for that, you are creating projected revenue gains. Now, where this comes into happy for our budget seasons is a lot of times your argument of what you're looking to do is connected to what you think you could perform at if you created the models. Talking about what ifs. Now, here's a scenario that happens, and I've been on both sides of the table, the one presenting and the one having to endorse. I've been presented to, and I'm the one now pitching to. And I always say that this question comes up. So out of the budget lines that you've proposed, or the budget lines we're reviewing, do you feel that we are optimizing the opportunity presented by what you're wanting to spend on, or is there still room to spend more money productively? And 9 times, 99.9%, not just 9 out of 10 times, the person that gets asked that question does not have a sustainable answer. They have a guess, they have an opinion. Well, yeah, sure, we spent more money, we should be able to make more money out. Really, can you prove that? Because if you're maxed out at what you're getting out of this channel and you spend more money and you don't make the same margin of value that you're proposing with the current spend, the diminished law of diminished value of return, then you're not telling the truth and you're going to fail, and they're not going to be trusted the next time you go to the table asking for more money about another project. Because, well, remember that time that you said yes and it was really a no? Yeah, we do. And we're not going to give you the money here that you're asking for now. It's all about trust and confidence factor. Confidence comes from data, and data is based on the numbers that you're giving it. This is where calculating projected revenue gains is so critical. If you can say, well, we're at a threshold that we're at this value. Spending more money, we feel, would put a tax on our return on investment. If you want to broaden the definition of an acceptable ROI, or an acceptable channel value strategy, top line contribution value strategy, then we feel that there's more room to grow by spending more money, but it'll be a more expensive acquisition. That's a hell of a lot different of an answer than the first one of an opinion going, yeah, sure, we'll spend more money, it'll be great. By the same token, if you've already maxed out what you're presenting, it's really rock solid that you're able to point that out saying, no, sir, we don't believe spending more money in this channel is productive, or ma'am, sorry, don't want to be unbiased about that. It's not productive we spend more money because we believe that this is the maximum opportunity of spending in this channel based on the value of what this channel can provide us. And they may be smart enough to ask back, how did you come to that? And say, well, we modeled projected potential revenue gains on this by not only stress testing the loss of it, which is always a big bonus, which we talked about last week, but also we looked at the possibility of the projected revenue gains should we modify it. And what we saw was a bridge too far. We could increase total top line gross revenue, but the cost expenditure to do so brought it below our threshold of acceptable net profitability, which made it not worth us to do. Holy juice, they're going to send you Christmas cards for doing that. Because you really kept their interest as the financiers, the people that make the decisions, in mind, saying, no, you could give me more money, but I wouldn't spend it here, because it wouldn't get the benefit of the reward that you're looking for based on the margins that you want to run. Obviously, there's circumstances about branding and market penetration, and there is times where you do spend more than it's worth in the sense of revenue net because you want to make a footprint and presence. This usually goes with grand openings, new properties, reflaggings, rebrandings, renovations, where you do spend past the net value of it because the impression footprint that you make by spending that kind of money to get in front of mind for people is worth it in the long term, which brings us to a key element of calculated revenue gains. And this one is one of the most forgotten, which used to be most used really back in the day. It was one of the ones that people actually abused using this too much. And that is lifetime value calculations. My gosh, if you asked anybody out of the blue to give you their formula for lifetime value, you'd get as many answers as you did ask people. Most people don't even know how to calculate it, and it's one of the more simpler formulas to do. The better formulas are not so simple, but even a simple formula is better than what most people have. And that is that you're looking at the value of the transactions, the number of customers that paid that value of transaction, the frequency that you feel that they have historically paid for that transaction data, and what you project as the lifetime value or the number of years that they will spend that same amount in the same frequency over the duration of X time. That number of unrealized gain is one of the most critical points to make about direct channel contribution. If you have a situation where you are not able to convince the value proposition of direct channel versus other channels, let's just say OTAs, because they're the worst ones to do this, okay, then this is a silver bullet conversation to have. Why do I say this is an easy contrast for those two? OTAs, you get the business, you pay the commission, you get none of the residual direct channel value. As a matter of fact, the OTAs are so structured now, they are absolutely trying to make sure that the guest that bought through them stays their guest, their customer. They do not want them to become your customer. And there has been years of us formulating ways of converting the customer when they come in. We see them on the arrival sheet and say, hey, we noticed you booked with Expedia. That's great. We'll give you 20% off your next visit when you book direct with us. Here's the direct booking link for us. Because the cost of the commission for them to come through Expedia is only the first of 1,000 cuts. You lost that commission. And unfortunately, I wouldn't say the ignorant, but the naive or the lazy look at it as like, hey, I don't have to pay no budget item. I'll pay commissions because commissions are only on actualized. So if it costs me 20% to get them in through Expedia, I'm smart. As a matter of fact, I don't want to spend money on any advertising. I'll just let Expedia do all the advertising for me. I'll pay 20% commission. I don't have to pay salaries. I don't have to pay platforms. I don't have to. Worst, dumbest, laziest thing for people to make decisions on. It's almost as bad as doing PMAX on Google. I'll throw it in the same category. Because what you're doing is you're giving away the farm. You are literally giving the cow away and they're just going to hand you back milk. And you're happy for it, even though you're paying for the cow. Because what you're doing is you have no residual value relationship with that guest that stayed at your hotel. Even though they had a thoroughly enjoyable time with you, they probably plan on coming back. They might even plan and schedule to come back, but they don't book with you when they do. They only book with the OTA. So you're always paying a third party to walk the person into the door when they were already standing at your front door to do it. I'm not against OTAs. They have high value for marketing strategy, but in this case of an example of comparison of direct channel and what future revenue gains means to that with lifetime value calculations compared to the single cheap sale of an OTA where you only pay commissions and you think you're saving on everything else is a horrendously shitty, bad comparison. Why is the lifetime value so important for direct channel? One is, even if they do end up canceling with you and they don't even stay with you, you're like, well, that's terrible. Yeah, it is. But you still have their information and you have the whole methodology of keeping connected with them so that they may not have bought with you the first time if they canceled, but you have an opportunity to resell them the next time. And better yet, if they did stay with you the first time and they had that good quality experience that we were just talking about, then they have more of a reason to stay connected to you if you incentivize and value that relationship and reward them for that. So how does lifetime value calculate into this? Say, for instance, I had somebody stay and they spent a total of $500 for their stay for the room. Okay. I'm not going to make up length of stays and stuff. Just between the length of stay and the ADR, they banked you $500 in room fees or room costs. Room revenue, not cost, sorry. Okay. And they did that twice this year. They stayed with you twice. They came for their spring break and they came for their summer break. Let's say they're transient. So that customer is worth 2 engagements, $500 each, or $1,000 per year. Okay. Depending upon what you can show as residual ownership, relationship value, where you get 30% retention on people that engage with you and so forth, and the fact that you keep connected with them, there is a work effort on your side. You have to do CRM engagements. You have to have yourself in front of with all the events and content. You have to do all the things that make you a valuable property in your market. Okay. Just doing this thinking they're going to come back on your doorstep and you do nothing for it is unrealistic. But if you look at the fact that this guest is worth two purchases per year for a total of $1,000, okay, that's $1,000 on your bank this year. But if you say that they're going to be a guest of yours for the next 7 years, that's $7,000, okay, past the first year, another 7, okay. So that whole acquisition of a direct channel by getting their email, knowing who they are, because they booked with you, they're in your CRM system, they're in your folio. You have information about them that you can cultivate a relationship after they've gone. If they had a good visit, keep in communication, get on the emails, give them offers, so forth and so on. If you calculate in a simple formula, the frequency of their purchases and the value of their purchases and extend it over the years of their potential purchases with it, you have a lifetime value. So now you're not talking about the one purchase you did through the OTA and only paid 20% commission on. You're talking about the full value of the initial purchase. Okay, so that's $1,000 compared to $900, or excuse me, $800 because of 20% commission. Plus, you get them for another $7,000 more on top. So you're looking at an $8,000 value compared to an $800 value with an indeterminate return from them because you can't talk to them. The next time they're going to come to your market, they might just look at all the hotels with you being, oh, I remember staying there. Yeah, it was nice. But look at this one over here. And because Expedia is offering them, remember, Expedia is out to sell you a hotel room, not necessarily your hotel room to a guest. They just, as long as they sell one. So they're going to show you up with everybody else. And yes, they might have had a pleasant stay, but they're comparing you now to what they're seeing now for their next choice. It's not that your guest won't see that next time they come back with you, but if you do your job right, marketing with them and keeping in communication with them, then the leverage that you have of that experience and that perpetual engagement with them will benefit the fact that there's a higher conversion opportunity for them to come back. Nothing's in stone, nothing's guaranteed, but it definitely stacks it on your side of the table better if you do these things to get them back in a lifetime value sequence. And if you calculate that when you're doing things, it warrants why you have a budget to spend paid ads for direct channel conversions to your website or your booking engine if you run them directly there or whatever, than it is to allow the default of an OTA channel just to pay them commission for it. Again, not against OTAs, but the contribution value of them is measured to their usage of what you need them for. You need to expand in your upper funnel exposures. OTAs are great because they'll bring you there. With the caveat, you have to pay not only the commissions, but pay for riding their coattails and paying advertisement to be enhanced in their platforms so that you're first upfront and choiced. Anyways, the idea of lifetime value is a high value calculation for projected revenue gains. And one of the better examples of projected revenue gains. Some of the other ones are looking at your different channels and seeing if there's room to spend at the same ratio of return that you're getting, and where does that line get drawn where it isn't as valuable and productive, and creating those projected revenue gains and determining where that line is. And it doesn't stay in the same place all the time. It shifts and moves, just like your business cycles shift and move. Sometimes it can go up farther because there's such a high demand. It's easy to spend more to get in front of more people because more people are looking for you. And then there's other times where there's less people looking for you and you're in a higher competitive environment with your comp set and other places like OTAs and stuff, where it costs you too much to get in front of the few people that are looking for you. So very big contrast as to strategies, ebbs and flows. And you need to know where that line shifts and moves. And it's all via math. It's taking the proper data sets, combining them in a way that understands how they influence each other, and knowing where those changes in cost come into. If I'm talking in vagueness, I actually don't think I'm thinking being very clear on these things. It's just whether you're interested in the idea of this, because it's one of these exercises that isn't done by most people. A lot of agencies, this is too much work, or I don't have time for this work, or that's nice if I had all the data I needed work, or any other excuse that pops up for them, really. But revenue projection models and the calculations of those models, with the technology that's out there right now, and the ability to frame prompts in AI, giving them proper data sources to work from. Don't make them come up with fake information, or don't make them go search for whatever information this might be generally available, because if they look at generalized information, they're going to give you a generalized answer. If they look at data that you find valuable in Google Sheets and so forth, here's my histories, here's my information that I'm going to use as relevance for my query, and you make a prompt that structures looking at that data, you're going to get an answer based on that data. That's the answer you want if you're going to use these kind of methodologies. So there are some historical ways of, I would say historical ways of doing it. It's actually the first way, but there are different ways of doing revenue projection models. You hear like in stock markets, unrealized gains and so forth, or paper gains. These are terms that are related to the fact that if you have a stock and you bought it for $1, now it's worth $10. You're saying, oh, I have a $10 stock. Well, you don't until you cash it in. It's paper gain. That's what they say it's worth if you were to sell it right now, but you have to sell it right now to get that money. Since you're not selling it right now, it's a paper gain. It says it's worth that much until it's not worth that much. Same thing with projection models. It says you have that opportunity until you actually realize it. You don't bring projections to the bank. There's no check that writes that says projection of revenue. It's this much. Please cash that. It doesn't work. These are tools to define numbers to know about confidences of success. So there's 4 different ways of doing projection models in general. There's other variations, but these are the 4 basic ways of doing it. You have historical forecasting, which is literally what you do to create forecasting. Here's my old numbers. Here's what I think I would produce from those same numbers based on any increases of volume and or levels of traffic or other modifiers. I would apply the same metrics from my historical data onto my new projected numbers, historical forecasting. Then you have things like length of sales forecasting, sales cycle. This is where you're looking at time sweep of introduction to acquisition. These are ones that determine that if you influence your ability to expose yourself to a larger audience earlier, you increase the odds of conversion at the point of ZMOT, zero moment of transaction, because more people are considering the purchase. So a sales cycle forecast is based on when do you influence your model impact of, do I increase my volume of presence? Do I increase my value of conversion? Where do I hit this sales cycle to increase the conversion values that I'm modeling for? Then we have one we talked about, test market analysis. So once you go over and you build up models that you have high confidence on, you want to test market them, you bring them into the wild with actually doing sample budgeting, looking for the reactions and the timescale correlations and KPIs that warrants that the integrity of your hypothesis, your model, is holding on to what created that process, that the logic of the model itself. If it doesn't, or it has fractures, you can go back and see what acted differently than what you anticipated, and see if it's something you can identify or is a variance of the test itself. And then the other one is the more advanced way of looking at just what we talked about, and that is a multivariable analysis. And that is where you take in more than just one variation of what you modify and say that these following conditions are being changed with the anticipation that these following conditions get changed. And so if that's the case, we're looking at the entirety of the changes based on the result of the entirety of the results. That might be more of a fuzzy, soft answer for what multivariable analysis does, because there's so many ding, 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 ding tangents that you can go off on this with, in the idea that you look at categorizing your variables into context. If you're changing your offers versus changing your targeting versus changing your budgets, those are three clusters, okay, that you might change several things in each one of them, but leave the other two clusters untouched. Because if you make too many changes in too many variables, you can't really identify the cause and effect that you're looking for in your modeling, your projected gaining, because there's no way to isolate what one thing or combinations of things really made the difference to what you did differently. Now, you might blind eye it and just say, you know what, it was a positive improvement for what we did. Don't know how the voodoo works, but you know what, it worked. So let's amp that thing up and throw more money at it and see if it sticks until it breaks. Done that too, where, you know what, I can't truly put the exact cause and effect functions together, but the magic is made and it's doing what we had hoped it did without the clarification of how. And I'm okay with that, as long as it holds to it. Now, I've done that where it held to up to a point and then it broke. Apparently, there's a limit to what the magic was doing, but it's okay. That's the multivariable analysis of it. I would love to think I'm brilliant enough to know all my variables and say, oh, yes, it's absolutely this in combination with this. No, there's sometimes like, I don't know why, but it's doing it. Let's do it. Let's turn it up. Anyways, so those are your four ways of creating but the ways of doing projected revenue gains and models when it comes to revenue projections and so forth: historical, length of sales, test market, and multivariable. Those are your four core main ones. There's variations to that. There's types of those ones. The types of content that you need to do these things, you need your current pipeline data. Where am I getting it from? What's it costing me to get it? Where am I doing what I'm doing? What's the result of what I'm doing in those channels, those current pipeline things? Then you want to go over and on the other side of that, and literally on this side, there's this. And on this side, there's this. Where am I trying to get with this? What am I trying to develop? I'm trying to develop audience, branding, so to speak. Am I trying to develop pure conversions, revenue? What am I trying to do? Displacement of a competitor? There's lots of different ways that you would tackle what you're trying to do, but your projected aspect of this. And you connect your goals to your current pipeline stuff and see the pieces that would be used and the pieces that wouldn't be used, that they don't have an applicability to what you're trying to define as your projected pipeline goal. And then you start breaking it down into really just the three most major categories: the cost of what you're trying to do, the gains that you might get from it, and this is the most important part that you talk to anybody about that gives you a check to do this: what's the net value of all this? It's great that you can cover the cost. Yay us. And if that's the goal, yay us twice. But if it's to generate the revenue eventually that makes it the person worthwhile for giving you a check to do it to begin with, what's the net value of this process? Okay. And then from all of that, you create a ratio that's really your golden ratio, which is basically your cost and gain ratio out of this. Doing what we're doing now, we're succeeding. This is our forecast. This is what we're projecting. This is what we're doing. That's fine. We stress tested to know if we lost factors, what we do into compensation and how much we could compensate for before we start losing. That was last week's conversation. We got that done. Now we're talking about what's the cost gain of going into this realm of projected gains, projected revenue gains. That what could we do if, and how would this work that, and what confidences do we have doing that? And how much is that diminished value of return line going to be? And does it shift and where? And do we know where it is? And do we know all the variables that we're trying to mess with? That whole cost gain ratio conversation is the ultimate acid test when it comes to the project overall when you projected revenue gains modalities. So, not to keep you on the hook for the entire hour of happiness and joy, but keeping you in 45 minutes of it anyway. Thank you all. This whole week, actually, lots of positive feedback from the TV station. For those that don't know, we have a TV channel. You can find it on your Roku TV, Google TV, Amazon TV, Apple TV, Samsung TV. Any place you have a smart TV, just look for the Hospitality channel. The live show is always on the free side. We do have a pay gateway with some other cool content behind it, but we're not here to pitch that. We also have a peer-level hospitality marketers club called the Hospitality Marketing Club. Go figure. Go to that website, hospitalitymarketing.club. There's just a little box, kind of like a Google box. Put your email in. I send you a quiz. If you pass the quiz, it means you know what you're doing in the sense of at least basic marketing. You're just not here to learn basics, but you actually are doing stuff and you have better questions. we join you to the club, and you have a great peer group. We have different tiers of peers in it because some people are very highly advanced where I'm like, wow, you guys are really talking over my head. And other ones I'm like, yeah, cool, it's my peers. We have that going on. We have a 24-hour, 24/7 radio station, Hospitality Radio. You can find it. We're on 26 channels with it. We're global with that. It's 24/7. It's just, and what it is right now is my podcast and a few other great hospitality podcasts. We have them playing. We have like the Revenue Management Hour, and we have the Meta Search Hour, and that kind of stuff. And then we have our podcast. We've been doing that for 17 years, really. The live show TV station we've been doing for 10 every week, both of them every week. The podcast, you can find that Hospitality Marketing Podcast. You can see a theme there. The show here, we simulcast, as you're probably catching it as well if you're watching us on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, Twitch. Twitch is actually the media boxes we go on for if you use your PS5 or Xbox for media. We're on there as well on Twitch. But we broadcast regularly. We're doing a couple articles a week now based on the content of our show. So you'll probably see an article related to what we talked about today. The article for our show 421, I think, went out yesterday, Thursday. I post those on LinkedIn. You can look for me, Loren Gray, on LinkedIn, and you'll see the articles, or you can look for Hospitality Digital Marketing as a business page. We put the articles up there as well. We're going to be blowing up a whole new blog post with our newsletter. We have a new dynamic newsletter. It actually changes according to the content you're interested in and engage with from hospitality marketing. We're actually going to be adding more of a persistent blog component into it, where we're taking the context of our shows and putting it into blog format for it. Thank God for technology. And we do transcribe and put in multiple languages our podcasts. The live show too. Sorry, the live show. We translate those into a total of 11 languages. We broadcast the TV station in 209 countries. Our podcast is in 36 countries. 39. It's in 36 countries on 39 platforms. And our radio station's on 26 platforms, also in 180 countries at this point. I haven't got a final count on it because it keeps growing, which is really wonderful. You can always reach out to me at Loren@hospitalitydigitalmarketing.com if you have questions, comments, feedback, like to be on the show. We have more and more openings that we're going to start creating for co-hosts to come with us to join on the show to talk more about these types of contexts and things that for hospitality professionals to know more about. And I think I hit all of the self-pitching stuff I can do today. So hopefully our conversation today about realized gains or calculating realized gains will be helpful in your budgeting process. We'll, of course, continue on with next week. We'll have another topic related to, and we'll try to keep very thematic with the budgeting because that's where everybody's head's at right now. But we'll also be doing a podcast after this, our audio podcast I just mentioned, which we do a part of the podcast is a lot shorter and more concise. We talk more specifically about tools like Giro and how to use them and function for the particular technique. And then we do a little recap of our live show here and a couple of little news points of what's happening this week. And we put that in our podcast that gets distributed on the radio station. It gets distributed in our podcast, all that kind of fun stuff. You can find us, even Amazon's Alexa, Google Assistant, and Apple's Siri just asked to play the Hospitality Marketing Podcast, and we're there. Made skills for those a long time ago. Anywho, my name is Loren Gray. I thank you for the privilege of your time, and I truly look forward to talking to you all next week.